Thanks, Kelly. I want to start out with a question for you all. I'm fairly confident that everyone in this session either has children or was once themselves a child. If so, you may be familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure books. If you are, go ahead and type a quick yes in the chat box. So let's see, we've got Dino Lab, we've got Your Very Own Robot, and The Abominable Snowman. So each one allows you to pick your own path as you read through the books, sometimes ending up at a different place, and almost always different than your friend who's reading along with you. When we talk about climate policy, and when people ask what it means for electric cooperatives, I tend to think about these Choose Your Own Adventure books. But we'll get back to that a bit more later. So as you know, climate policy has been and will continue to be one of the signature issues for President Biden and many congressional leaders. But what actually falls under the umbrella of climate policy? Well, it depends on who you're talking with. As a starting point, it's the overall view that the United States, and even the world, needs to reduce carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. How and at what pace to do so, though, remains a very open question on Capitol Hill and within the Biden administration. Some have proposed tax incentives to spur low or no carbon technologies, while others have advocated a carbon tax as a way of reducing emissions. Some have looked to eliminate regulatory barriers to technology deployment and transmission build-out, while others have proposed establishing federal clean electricity standards that utilities must meet. In many proposals, electrification is seen as the primary way for other sectors, transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, to reduce their carbon emissions. So they look to the power sector to be the first mover in reducing or even eliminating emissions. So you might be thinking to yourself, how am I actually able to impact or shape this issue, especially when there are so many different ideas that are out there? First, let me put your mind at ease on one point. Don't feel that you need to change a senator's or a congressman or woman's mind on the overarching issue. Whether you're speaking with a member on the far left, the far right, or anywhere in between, they likely already have a strong opinion on if and how quickly carbon emission reductions are needed. To have a constructive and impactful conversation, I'd recommend focusing on three things: share co-op progress, share co-op stories, and share co-op principles. First, on co-op progress. Electric co-ops substantially lowered carbon emissions by 18% between 2005 and 2019, the equivalent of taking nearly 7.4 million cars off the road. In doing so, electric co-ops are meeting commitments to their members as well as the environment. In meeting these commitments, co-ops are focused on a just and reasonable approach to climate policy and our energy supply that prioritizes the affordable, reliable, and responsible delivery of electricity to every community. Second, on co-op stories. I want you to think back to those Choose Your Own Adventure books. Every state is unique, and every co-op is unique. So it makes sense that every co-op will have its own unique story to tell. Regardless of where you've come from, or where you'll end up, I bet there is a part of your story that speaks to meeting the needs of your consumer members through reliable, affordable power, while also advancing low or zero emission technologies. And if after thinking about it, you don't have a story that you want to share, that's okay too. Just lean in on the co-op principles that we'll discuss a little bit later. Or feel free to share what others are doing if you think it's helpful to the conversation. In my own personal experiences with co-ops across the country, a few examples of stories come to mind. In 2019, I had the opportunity to visit Minn Kota Power in North Dakota and see Project Tundra, a coal power plant carbon capture project they're developing that would be the largest of its kind in the world. In 2018, I visited Rappahannock Electric Cooperative in Virginia. Rappahannock has an innovative program under development to incentivize electric vehicle deployment, including bill credits to consumer members for charging during off-peak times. And they recently launched a peak time rebate program that provides savings to members that reduce their usage during summer peak events. And my parents are members of Price Electric Cooperative up in Wisconsin. Price, in partnership with Dairyland Power Cooperative, built a 2.5 megawatt utility-scale solar project a few years back and just recently launched a community solar garden as well. And yes, I've encouraged my parents to subscribe. So carbon capture, electric vehicles, advanced metering, community solar, add to that co-op interests in hydropower, nuclear, and geothermal, and innovative work in battery storage, energy efficiency, and microgrids. All of this is just a sampling of work being done day in and day out by co-ops that contributes to this larger conversation. Third and finally, on co-op principles. No need to write this down. The fact sheet on co-op views on a lower carbon future contains all of this information and more that will help you in your conversations. But when electric co-ops evaluate energy and environment policy proposals, it is always through the lens of affordability and reliability. We can add to that the need for responsibility, including environmental responsibility and flexibility. For this reason, it is essential that policymakers and stakeholders pursue a balanced and thoughtful approach that is inclusive of all energy sources and the communities that rely on them. As you discuss energy and climate policies with members of Congress this week and any time in the near future, there are a few key principles that we can all agree on and that I encourage you to highlight. Fundamentally, energy and climate policies, especially those that envision a lower carbon future, must consider and address, first, the lack of commercially viable electric generating technologies that are affordable, always available, and carbon-free. This speaks to the need to invest in needed infrastructure improvements, including the sustained development of energy technology. Second, that any transition must be accomplished over a reasonable and realistic timeframe that accounts for regional differences in energy resource availability and the potential for stranded assets. For example, although cooperatives continue adding low or no carbon generation, achieving 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035 is an overly ambitious goal. Third, such policies must ensure a just and reasonable approach that protects the availability of affordable, reliable electricity in every community, including our most vulnerable. This includes 92% of America's persistent poverty counties that are served by electric co-ops. Co-op progress, co-op stories, and co-op principles. With these tools, you'll be prepared to tackle any conversation on energy and climate policy and do so in a way that advances our co-op priorities. Now, I'm going to turn things over to Paul, who will wrap things up on our ask related to tax policy.